Welcome in, everyone. When you really think about the whole concept of nostalgia, well, it's a lot like trying to defuse a highly unstable, decades-old bomb.
Oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly volatile thing to mess with.
Right, you're basically standing there in the middle of this vast, hyper-judgmental cultural landscape, and you're just holding a tiny pair of wire cutters.
And everyone is watching your every move.
Exactly. So you've got the red wire, right? And that represents the original, beloved, completely untouchable classic that everyone grew up with.
Right, the sacred text.
Yeah, the sacred text. And then you've got the blue wire, which is, modern audience expectations and the desperate need of a movie studio to actually turn a profit.
Which are often entirely at odds with each other.
Completely at odds. And if you cut the wrong one, boom, the internet just completely explodes, your studio loses hundreds of millions of dollars, and you are forever branded as the cynical executives who ruin everyone's childhood memories.
It's a uniquely perilous position for any filmmaker to be in, really. I mean, you aren't just dealing with a piece of media or like a static intellectual property.
It's way deeper than that.
It is. You're dealing with people's deeply ingrained memories of who they were and how the world felt when they first experienced that media. It's a foundational anchor to their own past.
It's intensely personal, and honestly, that psychological minefield is what makes today's mission so fascinating for you all listening today.
We have a lot to get through.
We really do, because for this deep dive, we are taking a massive stack of sources. I mean, everything from decades-old studio development logs and deep financial metrics to critical teardowns by YouTube reviewers.
People like Jeremy Johns and John Campea.
Yes, and Tamara Jessa plus IGN, and just the raw, visceral reactions from everyday audiences. And we're using all of it to unpack a film that was essentially a ticking nostalgia bomb.
A bomb that somehow didn't go off.
Right. We are diving into the unlikely, meteoric, and frankly baffling success of Jumanji. Welcome to the jungle.
A fascinating case study.
Truly. We want to figure out how a sequel that literally nobody seemed to be asking for,
Literally no one.
burdened by vitriolic internet backlash and the daunting legacy of a beloved Robin Williams classic, somehow managed to become a nearly billion-dollar juggernaut.
It defies a lot of conventional industry logic.
It does. Okay, let's unpack this. How on earth did this actually happen?
Well, I think to really understand the mechanics of this phenomenon, we have to look at it through the lens of evolutionary biology.
Oh, wow. Okay, biology, go on.
Yes, specifically the survival instincts of intellectual property. The success of this movie is just a masterclass in how a dormant brand can literally, reboot its own DNA to survive a hostile, changing cultural environment.
That's a wild way to look at it, but it makes sense.
It recognized that the ecosystem of the 1990s was dud, and it adapted its entire structure to avoid extinction.
Survival of the fittest, but for Hollywood blockbusters. I can see that. But the evolution was not smooth at all.
No, it was a very long, very painful process.
Yeah, to appreciate the final product, we have to sift through the wreckage of its time in development hell. Because our sources show that Sony actually wanted a Jumanji sequel as far back as 1999.
Which, financially, makes total sense on paper. That's just 4 years after the original 1995 film.
Right.
The 1995 film was a massive financial success and a pioneering achievement in computer-generated imagery for its time. So the studio was highly motivated to strike while the iron was hot.
Sure, capitalize on the hit.
Exactly. But the fundamental problem was that they entirely misdiagnosed what made the first movie resonate with audiences in the first place.
Misdiagnosed is putting it so mildly. Wait until you hear the bizarre concept they actually spend money developing in 1999.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the research.
It's insane. So the proposed plot for Jumanji 2 centered around a character named John Cooper. And John Cooper just so happens to be the president of the United States.
Because of course he is.
Right. So according to deep dive reports from Ain't It Cool News at the time, the president is over in Europe on diplomatic business. He wanders into an old antique store, buys the Jumanji board game, and brings it back to the White House.
As one does.
Obviously. He wants to play it with his kids, specifically his son, Butch, who apparently is suffering from extreme middle child syndrome and just wants a regular dad, not the leader of the free world.
It's so wildly out of left field.
It gets crazier. The president rolls the dice and gets sucked into the jungle dimension. This creates a power vacuum, paving the way for his evil vice president to stage a quiet coup and take over the country.
And we have to mention who was supposed to play the vice president.
Yes, it was specifically slated to be played by Steve Buscemi.
Unbelievable.
All while the president is inside the game, teaming up with a bunch of CGI hybrid animals to fight his way back to the Oval Office.
I mean, it sounds like an absolute fever dream generated by an algorithm that was fed a diet of 90s political thrillers and Saturday morning cartoons.
It really does. It's totally unhinged.
But analytically, it is a fascinating artifact. It perfectly illustrates the sheer panic of a studio that knows they have a valuable brand name but has no idea what the emotional core of that brand actually is.
Right. They just slap the name on a crazy script.
Exactly. The 1995 Jumanji wasn't a sprawling political epic. It was an intimate, claustrophobic, and somewhat terrifying story about a deeply broken family.
Yeah, the trauma of abandonment, the fear of growing up.
Right. Moving that emotional core into a geopolitical White House thriller with Steve Buscemi orchestrating a coup is such a massive, bewildering, tonal disconnect.
It's completely baffling, and they were dead serious about it. The original film's visual effects supervisor, Ken Ralston, was planned to make his directorial debut with this version.
They had a whole release window planned.
Yeah, they were aiming for a Christmas 2000 release. They even had prototype sketches of these bizarre hybrid animals ready to go. The original co-writer, Jonathan Hensley, wrote the first draft.
But thankfully, someone stopped it.
Eventually, yeah. The sheer absurdity of the premise must have caught up with them because Ralston stepped down, the project stalled out entirely, and Sony just started cycling through a revolving door of writers and directors.
They threw everyone at it, didn't they?
Everyone. Steve Adekirk, Adam Rifkin, David S. Ward, even Chris Van Allsburg, the author of the original children's book.
They were caught in a classic sunk cost fallacy, just burning through development funds, trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
They even tried a desperation play in 2002. They pitched a version with director Dennis Dugan, actively trying to woo Robin Williams back to the franchise.
Assuming his mere presence would magically fix the narrative problems.
Exactly. But Williams wasn't interested. Sony passed on the project, and they ended up pivoting to develop Zathura in 2005 instead.
Which is an interesting pivot because Zathura, in the overarching lore of Van Allsburg's literature, shares a direct thematic continuity with Jumanji.
Right. It's essentially the sci-fi version.
Yes, it's a space-themed board game with similar escalating stakes. But the fact that a major, well-funded studio couldn't crack the script for a direct Jumanji sequel for over a full decade speaks volumes.
It really does.
The shadow cast by Robin Williams' performance was incredibly long, and the specific tone of the first movie, that blend of childhood wonder and genuine terror, is notoriously difficult to replicate.
It is. It's a very specific vibe. So the franchise basically goes dormant. Fast forward all the way to July 2012. The cultural landscape has completely shifted.
A lot changes in a decade.
A ton. So the Columbia Pictures president at the time, Doug Belgrad, gives an interview where he openly states, "We're going to try and reimagine Jumanji and update it for the present."
And then absolute silence for 3 more years.
Nothing until finally, in August 2015, Sony officially stakes its claim and announces a release date for a ground-up Jumanji remake. And the internet predictably lost its collective mind.
We have to place that August 2015 announcement into its proper historical and, more importantly, its emotional context.
Yeah, this is a crucial detail.
It really is. Because August 2015 was almost exactly 1 year after the tragic passing of Robin Williams.
The timing couldn't possibly have been worse. It felt incredibly raw to people.
The backlash was instantaneous and severe.
We pulled articles from that week, and E! News published an editorial calling the remake unnecessary and kind of insulting.
Which was the polite version of what people were saying.
Yeah. Bradley Pierce, the actor who played the little boy Peter Shepard in the original 1995 film, went on the record publicly criticizing the announcement.
And Twitter was just a mess.
Oh, if you look at Twitter archives from that day, it is just a wall-to-wall dumpster fire of outrage. People were genuinely furious, asking, is nothing sacred anymore?
And this reaction perfectly illustrates why nostalgia is such a highly volatile commodity. For the millennial generation, Jumanji wasn't just a movie they saw once.
It was an event.
It was a foundational touchstone of their youth. It played constantly on VHS and cable television. So when the collective internet reacts with that level of violent hostility to a remake announcement, it's rarely just a debate about cinematic quality.
Or the necessity of modern special effects, right?
Exactly. It's a deeply psychological defense mechanism.
Yeah.
A remake feels like an active, aggressive erasure of a core childhood memory.
That makes total sense.
It feels as though a massive, faceless corporation is coming into your mind and attempting to overwrite the profound emotional connection you formed when you were 10 years old, sitting on the carpet watching a movie with your family.
And to attempt that overwrite so soon after Robin Williams' death. To the public, it just felt aggressively cynical and opportunistic.
Absolutely.
It feels like someone breaking into your childhood bedroom, throwing all your favorite well-worn toys into a garbage bag, and replacing them with shiny, plastic, mass-produced action figures that you never even asked for.
That's a great analogy.
Actually, one of the IMDb reviewers we sourced, a user named Bethany Cox, really captured the specific flavor of this outrage. Her review actually inspired a thought for me.
Oh, what did she say?
She wrote that she was sure of one thing. A remake of Jumanji is the exact same thing as repainting the Mona Lisa and exhibiting the copy. It's ridiculous and inglorious.
Wow. Strong words.
Right. So applying that, it's like a Hollywood studio taking a massive clumsy brush, slapping a coat of neon, focus group tested paint over a classic Renaissance painting, and then standing back, expecting the public to applaud them for updating it for modern sensibilities.
What's fascinating here is how accurate that representation is of the public's perception. You are tampering with a masterpiece, or at the very least a subjective masterpiece of personal nostalgia.
Which brings up a much larger systemic question about the industry for me. Hollywood operates on the assumption that established IP is the safest bet you can make, right? Brand recognition is everything.
That is the modern studio playbook, yes.
But in a case like this, is that reliance actually a massive handicap? Does the brand recognition backfire and become a lethal liability when the original material is so universally beloved?
It absolutely is a massive handicap, but with one crucial caveat. It's a handicap if you approach the project as a straight replacement or a traditional reboot.
Okay, so how do you get around it?
Well, brand recognition guarantees that people will pay attention to your marketing. But if the audience walks into the theater defensive, arms crossed, feeling angry and protective, they will actively look for reasons to tear the film apart.
Right, they want to hate it.
Exactly.
Ugh.
The slightest misstep, the smallest deviation from tone, becomes an unforgivable sin. But the filmmakers behind Welcome to the Jungle director Jake Kasdan, the producers, the writers, they clearly had their ears to the ground.
They heard the yelling?
They absorbed this intense hostility. They recognized that a straight one-to-one remake was a critical and commercial suicide mission, so they performed a brilliant pivot.
They shifted the whole paradigm.
They used the IP not as a restrictive straitjacket, but as a load-bearing foundation. They shifted from a traditional remake to a standalone sequel. They found a narrative backdoor that allowed them to honor the original film's mythology without ever trying to overwrite Alan Parrish's story.
They kept the red wire completely intact, but they built a brand new, highly sophisticated circuit board around it.
That's exactly what they did.
But the avatars, which we'll get to, are only half the joke. You can cast incredible actors, but to make the satire actually work, the world itself had to behave differently.
The rules of the universe had to change.
Let's look at the first 10 minutes of this movie, where they establish those new rules of the game and fundamentally modernize the magic. Let's dive into that prologue.
The prologue is where the movie firmly establishes its self-awareness and where it executes that evolutionary biological shift we discussed earlier.
Yeah. The movie actually opens in 1996, which is a brilliant chronological anchor. It's right after the events of the original movie, where the kids throw the board game off a bridge and it washes up on a beach.
Continuity right from the start.
Right. A teenager named Alex Vreek is given the classic wooden Jumanji board game by his dad, who happened to find it half buried in the sand while jogging on the coast.
But Alex doesn't care.
Not at all. Alex, being a typical 90s teenager, just tosses it aside onto a shelf. His exact words to his dad are, "Who plays board games?"
It's a mundane piece of dialogue, but it is incredibly crucial context. It's a completely realistic, highly relatable reaction for a teenager living in 1996.
Because of the tech boom?
Think about the technological leap happening at that exact moment in history. The original Sony PlayStation had just launched globally, the Nintendo 64 was hitting the market, and home entertainment was exploding into fully rendered 3D environments.
Kids were playing Super Mario 64 and Tomb Raider.
Exactly. In that specific cultural moment, a static wooden board game with carved tokens was entirely obsolete. It held zero cultural cachet for a teenager.
And the absolute genius of the script is that the game knows this. The game is listening.
It's sentient.
Later that night, while Alex is asleep, the board game literally begins to transform. It reshapes its physical matter. The wooden box collapses into itself, the components fuse together, and it morphs into a video game cartridge.
complete with the signature, ominous tribal drum beats. But now they sound slightly digitized.
Alex wakes up, intrigued, plugs the mysterious cartridge into his retro console, chooses a character from a pixelated menu, and gets violently sucked into the machine.
It is a brilliant narrative leap.
Mm.
In one fell swoop, it solves the massive problem of updating the intellectual property for a modern audience.
It's so clean.
By showing us this physical transformation, it establishes a core rule of the universe. Jumanji is a sentient, adaptive, predatory entity.
It's like a virus. If we think of the magic of Jumanji as a living viral strain, it realized its current vector of transmission, a board game, was no longer infectious.
It wasn't catching hosts anymore.
Right, because the culture had evolved past it. It was going to starve to death on that shelf. So it aggressively mutated its own DNA into a console game to capture Alex.
Precisely. It changes its bait to match the prey.
And then the script jumps us forward 21 years to the modern day. We get a setup that feels intensely familiar. It's a very Breakfast Club-style scenario.
Very classic teen movie setup.
4 wildly distinct high school stereotypes end up in detention together at Brantford High School. Let's look at who we're dealing with. You have Spencer, the nerdy, highly intelligent, allergic to everything kid who is crippled by his own lack of confidence.
The classic nerd archetype.
Right. You have Fridge, the massive, imposing star athlete whose childhood friendship with Spencer has completely deteriorated due to the rigid social hierarchy of high school.
The jock.
Then there's Bethany, the ditzy, relentlessly popular, phone-obsessed blonde who literally gets detention because she refuses to stop video calling her friends during a quiz.
The princess.
And finally, Martha, the shy, highly cynical, judgmental wallflower who gets in trouble for aggressively insulting the gym teacher's intelligence.
The basket case, to use the Breakfast Club terminology.
Exactly. They are stuck in the school basement, ordered to clean out hundreds of old magazines. Instead, they find the old retro console with the Jumanji cartridge still jammed in it. To kill time, they boot up the game, pick their avatars, and boom, they're pixelated and sucked into the jungle.
Now, what's fascinating here from a critical perspective is that the consensus on this real-world opening act was intensely polarized. A lot of reviewers outright hated it.
Hated is the right word. John Campea, one of the more prominent YouTube film critics we sourced, was incredibly vocal about his disdain for the beginning.
He did not hold back.
No, he explicitly said in his review that for the first 10 to 15 minutes, he was actually ready to walk out of the theater.
Wow.
He thought the script was suffocatingly thick with lazy high school melodrama. He found the 4 teenagers to be such extreme, rigid stereotypes that there was absolutely no substance to them.
He felt the entire opening completely lacked narrative momentum.
Yes, and he definitely wasn't an outlier. That IMDb reviewer we mentioned earlier, Bethany Cox, echoed the exact same sentiment, writing that the first 20 minutes felt incredibly awkward and dragged significantly just to set the board up.
It was a common complaint.
Tamara, from the YouTube channel Tamara Just Saw, even felt the physical transition of the game to a cartridge was a bit cheesy and highly convenient. She wished the filmmakers had taken the time to explain the deep lore behind how the spirit of Jumanji actually manifests its power.
I understand the critical frustration, but if we analyze the film structurally, those opening stereotypes weren't lazy writing. They were a calculated, brutal narrative necessity.
How so?
When you are writing a body swap comedy, which is the fundamental engine of this film, you are operating on the psychology of contrast. You have to establish the baseline of who these people are in the real world as clearly, efficiently, and loudly as possible.
So subtlety is out the window.
Exactly. You cannot fully appreciate the extreme, hilarious juxtaposition of the body swap later in the film if you don't paint the real-world kids in the broadest, most easily identifiable strokes imaginable.
I guess that makes sense.
If Spencer was just a slightly awkward but generally capable, well-adjusted kid, the reveal of him becoming The Rock isn't nearly as funny. He has to be intensely neurotic, fragile, and terrified of his own shadow for the joke to truly detonate.
But wait, I hear what you're saying about narrative efficiency and the psychology of contrast makes sense, but isn't that just a highly convenient excuse for a lazy cookie-cutter writing?
I would call it lazy.
But why couldn't the writers give us genuinely complex, multi-layered teenagers who also happen to get sucked into a game? Do we really have to resort to the dumb jock and the shallow cheerleader in 2017 just to make a joke work an hour later?
It's a valid pushback, but it really comes down to the brutal mathematics of screen time. Nuance and complexity require time to build.
And they only have 2 hours.
Right. If you spend 45 minutes in the real world establishing deep, subtle internal conflicts for 4 different teenagers, you completely eat up the runtime meant for the jungle adventure, which is the primary conceit the audience paid to see.
True, nobody bought a ticket for a teen drama.
Exactly. The filmmakers consciously chose efficiency over depth in the first act. They weaponized highly recognizable tropes: the jock, the nerd, the princess, the basket case, because the audience's brain immediately fills in the blanks.
We've seen those characters a million times.
We know these characters intimately from decades of John Hughes movies and teen cinema. By leaning heavily on those established cliches early on, they buy themselves the necessary runway for the actual payoff. And the payoff is a profound psychological concept: ego death.
Ego death. How so?
Well, adolescence is entirely about constructing an ego, a label to protect yourself. I am the athlete. I am the smart one. I am the pretty one.
Right, your identity is your armor.
By ripping these kids out of their bodies and stripping away the physical attributes that define their social status, the game forces an ego death. They have to discover who they actually are underneath the labels. And you can't tear down a cliche unless you establish it firmly first.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. The label is the armor, and the game strips the armor away. Which brings us to the absolute core of why this movie worked so incredibly well. Let's examine the avatars.
This is the magic trick of the movie.
This is where the movie elevates from a clever, slightly cheesy concept to a genuinely hilarious, masterfully executed comedy. Let's break down this primary cast because the contradictions they are asked to play are staggering.
They are the engine driving the entire billion-dollar vehicle. Without this specific alchemy of casting, the high-concept premise probably collapses under its own weight.
Let's start with the heaviest hitter on the poster. You have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson playing Dr. Xander Smolder Bravestone.
A perfect video game hero name.
Incredible name. On the outside, he's this impossibly strong, hyper-confident archaeologist, explorer, and all-around action hero. But inside, his consciousness is Spencer, the deeply neurotic, unconfident, scrawny kid we just discussed.
The contrast is immediate.
So Spencer suddenly finds himself trapped in a body that has absolutely no weaknesses, possesses super strength, and has a literal smoldering intensity that happens involuntarily as a passive video game skill.
And John Campea noted in his review that this performance was a massive, desperately needed improvement over Johnson's other major comedy vehicle that year.
Oh, Baywatch.
Yes, the critically panned Baywatch movie. Campea is entirely right. And there is a deep history of action stars utilizing comedy to soften their image. Think of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Twins or Kindergarten Cop.
Right, playing against type.
But Johnson's specific brand for the last decade has been the unstoppable, unflappable alpha male. He is the guy who saves the day while barely breaking a sweat. In Jumanji, he actively subverts his own multi-million-dollar brand.
He's terrified the whole time.
He gets to play a terrified, highly anxious teenager who is constantly amazed, bewildered, and slightly freaked out by his own massive biceps. The physical acting required is subtle, but brilliant.
Like when he's just staring at his own muscles.
Yes. He's physically flexing, his muscles are bulging, but his internal monologue is pure panic. The way he holds his shoulders slightly hunched, the nervous modulation in his voice when a squirrel startles him, it allows Johnson to tap into a self-deprecating, highly vulnerable humor that general audiences deeply respond to.
He is expertly portraying a kid pretending to love his new body while simultaneously being terrified of the jungle environment.
It's fantastic.
It's the juxtaposition of the voice cracking coming out of a 250-pound wall of muscle. Then you have Kevin Hart playing Franklin Mouse Finbar.
It's a great pairing.
Inside, he's Fridge, the towering, intimidating high school football player who is entirely used to moving through the world with physical dominance and respect. Suddenly, he's sucked into the game and trapped in the body of a diminutive, highly excitable zoologist whose only real programmed job in the game is to be a human backpack.
Carrying Bravestone's heavy weapons.
Exactly. And to make the humiliation complete, his list of character weaknesses includes speed, strength, and cake. Cake.
The sheer absurdity of having pound cake as a fatal explosive weakness is pure, ridiculous video game logic.
It's so fun.
But beyond the joke, the comedic chemistry between Johnson and Hart is on full, spectacular display here. They'd recently starred together in the buddy cop comedy Central Intelligence, and this film capitalizes on that established rapid-fire dynamic perfectly.
But it adds a layer of power inversion, right?
Exactly. You have the tall, imposing athlete trapped in Kevin Hart's small body, absolutely furious at his sudden lack of physical stature, having to take orders from the tiny nerd he used to bully, who is now built like a Greek god.
It's a total, immediate power inversion. Hart plays the sheer indignity of the situation flawlessly. Every time he has to pull a massive, impossibly large rocket launcher out of his tiny backpack, his frustration just boils over.
It's classic slapstick, but rooted in character.
And then there's Karen Gillan playing Ruby Roundhouse. Inside, she's Martha, the quiet, insecure, highly cynical wallflower who hates gym class. Now she is a badass explorer and martial arts expert whose special skills include kapara, karate, and dance fighting.
Now, we have to talk about the controversy here.
Yes, we definitely do. When the very first promotional photos dropped of the cast in the jungle featuring Gillan in this scantily clad, midriff-bearing, tiny shorts outfit, the internet lashed out again.
The reaction was very swift.
People were furious on Twitter and entertainment blogs, calling the costume design blatantly sexist, entirely unnecessary, and a massive step backward for female representation in blockbusters.
But critics like Jeremy Jans and Tamra both pointed out in their reviews how the film brilliantly and analytically justifies the outfit within the context of the narrative.
It's not just a costume.
It's a direct, highly intentional critique and satire of 1990s video game tropes. They were specifically targeting how female characters like Lara Croft from the original Tomb Raider games were designed entirely for the male gaze.
And the movie addresses it head-on. Martha herself complains about the outfit relentlessly, pointing out how completely insane and impractical it is to wear a half shirt and leather short shorts in a mosquito-infested, highly dangerous jungle environment.
It's a very sharp, preemptive piece of meta-commentary by the screenwriters. They fully anticipated the cultural criticism regarding the costume, and they baked the rebuttal directly into the text of the movie.
Which is pretty clever.
Martha's intense vocal discomfort with her own avatar's hypersexualized appearance highlights the sheer absurdity of those old character designs. And watching this shy, cynical teenager have to learn how to awkwardly flirt with a group of heavily armed guards to create a distraction,
Oh, that scene is incredible.
which Tamra highlighted in her review as one of the absolute funniest, most cringe-inducing scenes in the movie, is incredibly funny, but also deeply endearing. She has to weaponize a sexuality she doesn't even understand yet.
And finally, we absolutely have to talk about Jack Black as Professor Sheldon Shelley Oberon.
The absolute standout.
Inside, he's Bethany, the superficial, intensely popular, phone-obsessed teen girl. Everyone across the board in our sources, John Campea, Jeremy Jans, Tamara, the countless IMDb reviewers, they all universally praise Jack Black as the MVP performance of the film.
Tamara even declared in her review, and I quote, "Jack Black is a goddess."
He really is. He is playing a popular teenage girl trapped in the body of an overweight, middle-aged male cartographer, and he fully commits to the bit without ever mocking the subject matter.
That is the crucial, delicate distinction in Black's performance. It would have been so incredibly easy for a lesser actor to play that role as a mean-spirited, highly exaggerated, mocking caricature of a teenage girl.
Just a cheap joke.
A cheap, one-dimensional joke about vocal fry, exactly. Instead, Jack Black plays Bethany with absolute, unironic sincerity. He captures the specific cadence, the vanity, the obsession with lighting and angles.
But also the heart.
Crucially, yes, he captures the genuine vulnerability of a teenage girl who has just been stripped of everything that gave her identity. Her phone, her social status, her followers, and her reflection.
The comedic structure here is just a masterclass in subverting expectations. Instead of leaning into the comfortable, highly lucrative personas that made them famous, these massive stars are forced to snatch different muscles.
But the reviewers caught on to something else deeper.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Peter Travers, the legendary critic from Rolling Stone, didn't just praise the comedy when he reviewed the film. He specifically praised the cast, particularly Jack Black, for finding the vulnerable heart of the character.
That's a beautiful, insightful phrase. Vulnerable heart.
This whole avatar selection process feels like the ultimate forced empathy exercise. It's like one of those corporate team-building retreats or high school empathy workshops, but escalated to a magical life-or-death extreme.
Everyone is walking in someone else's shoes.
Exactly. The jock is literally forced to walk a mile in the nerd's shoes, or rather the nerd's lack of physical stature, and experience the world as someone who gets overlooked. The popular girl has to live without her immense pretty privilege and experience society as a marginalized, middle-aged man.
It forces growth.
So I have to ask you a hypothetical question about this. Would this movie have worked with unknown, highly talented indie actors? Or does the entire premise, the entire joke, rely exclusively on our pre-existing parasocial knowledge of The Rock and Kevin Hart's real-life, massive celebrity personas?
It's a really sharp question regarding the mechanics of modern blockbuster filmmaking. I would argue strongly that the joke relies almost entirely on our pre-existing knowledge of the actors.
You really think so?
I do. The cinematic shorthand of casting someone like Dwayne Johnson is that the audience inherently, subconsciously expects him to save the day effortlessly. He is the ultimate modern action hero archetype.
Right, you see him, you know what you're getting.
So when that specific archetype starts screaming in a high-pitched, panicked voice because a centipede crawls over his boot, the massive dissonance between his physical appearance and his cowardly behavior is where the comedy lives.
And you don't get that with an unknown.
Exactly. If it were an incredibly talented but unknown actor, we wouldn't have those established, decades-long expectations to subvert. The movie smartly and ruthlessly leverages the audience's familiarity with the actor's off-screen brands.
It's so true for Kevin Hart, too.
Kevin Hart's rapid-fire, high-energy, complain stand-up persona works so well here because it's filtered through the genuine, tragic frustration of a high school jock who has lost his physical power.
The meta layer is everything.
The meta layer of celebrity casting is absolutely essential to the film's specific comedic alchemy. An indie cast might have found the emotional truth, but they wouldn't have generated the billion-dollar laughs.
That makes total sense. They use their own massive star power as the punchline. But to make the satire complete, the world around these avatars had to be just as specific. So let's look at how they built the environment.
The jungle itself.
Yeah, because this movie perfectly captures the maddening essence of 1990s video game mechanics without actually being based on a real existing game property like Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog.
Which was a brilliant legal and creative maneuver. It gave the writers Chris McKenna, Eric Summers, Scott Rosenberg, and Jeff Pinkner a massive amount of creative freedom.
They weren't tied down.
They weren't bound by the strict lore of an existing property. They could invent rules, glitches, and mechanics that specifically suited the comedic set pieces they wanted to build.
And they nailed the granular details. I mean, think about the last time you tried to replay a video game you loved as a kid. It's clunky, right? The mechanics are rigid. The movie captures that exact frustration.
Yes, like the NPCs.
Oh my gosh, the non-playable characters. We get characters like Rhys Darby's wonderfully cheerful Nigel Billingsley. He is the primary guide for the players, dropping them into the jungle, and he behaves exactly like an NPC from a 1996 PlayStation game.
He only has a highly limited set of programmed audio responses.
Right. When the characters interrupt him or ask him a question outside his scripted parameters, he glitches slightly, pauses, and just repeats his previous line with exactly the same cheerful inflection.
It's so frustrating for the characters, but intensely accurate to retro gaming.
And we get actual cinematic cutscenes that drop down like a letterbox on the screen, freezing the characters in place to explicitly explain the backstory of the jewel. We get the absurdly large backpack inventory logic.
Where Kevin Hart pulls out a rocket launcher.
Yes, out of a regular-sized canvas bag. And of course, the brilliant tension-building mechanic of the 3 lives tattoo on their forearms. Every time they die, they drop straight out of the sky with a specific sound effect, and a black bar permanently disappears from their arm.
And Jeremy Jans, who noted in his review that he is a massive gamer nerd himself, pointed out that the way the movie addresses video games is highly entertaining and remarkably accurate to the era.
Gamers definitely appreciated it.
Things like life bars, reading physical menus that hover in the air, and having strict, immutable strengths and weaknesses. It plays on the absurdity of how many items a character like Link can impossibly fit in his backpack in The Legend of Zelda.
But Tamara made an incredibly salient point in her review regarding the balance of this humor, didn't she?
She did. She noted that the humor was gamery enough for general audiences without ever becoming alienating.
Yes. She pointed out that if the writers went too deep into the obscure, highly technical weeds of hardcore gaming lore-making jokes about frame rates or polygon rendering, they might have completely alienated the casual viewer.
The parents or grandparents who just wanted to take their kids to a fun family movie.
Exactly. They found this perfect, highly accessible sweet spot. It honors the medium of video games without becoming an impenetrable inside joke. But, and there's a big glaring but here, in the critical response data we analyzed,
There always is.
almost every single source we looked at pointed out a major structural flaw in this gamified world.
A villain.
Yes, the big bad. Bobby Cannavale plays Russell Van Pelt. According to the cutscene lore, he is a corrupt archaeologist, a former partner of Bravestone's who steals a magical jewel called the Jaguar's Eye and gains supernatural control over the jungle's animals.
He is essentially a reimagined, updated version of the big game hunter from the original 1995 film.
And the critical consensus is that Cannavale, who's a phenomenal actor, is completely wasted in this role.
Jan Campea was actually quite frustrated by it in his review.
He was. He noted that the marketing leading up to the film never even mentioned Cannavale was in the movie. He said that what the script had him doing on screen was ridiculous and largely stupid.
Jeremy Johns couldn't even remember the villain's name during his review. He literally had to pause and think about it.
That's pretty telling.
He said Van Pelt just didn't stand out at all and completely lacked the terrifying, relentless, Michael Myers-esque presence of the original hunter.
Johns brought up a really interesting cinematic trend to explain this phenomenon, a trend that dominates modern blockbusters. He called it the MCU route of villainy.
Right. He argued that in a lot of modern ensemble movies, particularly the Marvel Cinematic Universe films that have trained audiences for the last decade, the focus is so heavily weighted on the hero's chemistry, their banter, and their internal group dynamics that the villain just takes a massive hit in screen time and character development.
The villain ceases to be a person and becomes an afterthought.
A purely functional mechanism designed solely to drive the plot from point A to point B. Contrast that with Jonathan Hyde's brilliant portrayal of Van Pelt in the 1995 original.
That guy was terrifying.
That guy wasn't just a guy with a gun. He was a relentless, terrifying psychological manifestation of Alan Parrish's deep-seated trauma and his own father's stern, unforgiving nature. He was genuinely scary to the kids.
And Cannavale's Van Pelt just... Well, he has CGI bugs crawling out of his ear, stares menacingly at the camera, and yells a lot.
It is a distinct, measurable shift in how blockbusters are constructed today compared to the 1990s. The psychological depth of the antagonist is sacrificed for pacing and comedic banter among the protagonists.
Which leads me to a structural question for you, looking at the script mechanics. In a movie where the real antagonist is arguably the environment itself, the treacherous jungle, the stampeding rhinos, the deadly hippos, the perilous cliffs, and the rigid, unforgiving rules of the video game itself, does a weak human villain actually matter to the success of the film?
That's a good question.
Or is Van Pelt just a necessary, highly functional placeholder so they can have a traditional, visually spectacular boss fight at the end to complete the game logic?
If we look at the film purely as a faithful structural adaptation of a 1990s video game, the weak, single-minded villain absolutely makes perfect sense.
Because game bosses are usually simple.
Think about most 16-bit platformers or action-adventure games from that era. The boss awaiting at the end of the level is rarely a deeply nuanced character with complex moral motivations or a tragic backstory.
They're just a big obstacle.
Exactly. They're usually just a giant, menacing physical obstacle with a specific, glowing weakness you have to hit 3 times to win the level. So, tying into the video game theme, he is a perfect, structurally sound placeholder.
But as a movie character.
However, from a traditional cinematic storytelling perspective, is undeniably a missed opportunity. A stronger, more charismatic villain could have raised the emotional stakes significantly.
True.
But you're right to point out that the jungle itself is the primary physical antagonist.
Yeah.
And more importantly, the internal conflict between the teenagers learning to respect each other and themselves is the primary emotional antagonist.
The real battle is internal.
The film succeeds wildly despite the weak villain because the audience is simply having way too much fun watching The Rock and Kevin Hart bicker to care deeply about Bobby Cannavale's motivations for stealing a glowing green rock.
They really just needed a guy for The Rock to uppercut at the climax to grab the jewel, and boy did the audience respond to that simple, highly effective formula. Let's look at the absolute box office juggernaut this movie became and how it dramatically expanded the franchise.
Because the financial metrics we pulled for this deep dive are staggering.
They really are. This wasn't just a hit. It was a slow burn phenomenon that defied all conventional industry expectations and tracking models. The production budget was reportedly around $90 million.
Which is actually quite low for the genre.
Now, to the average person, that sounds like a fortune, but in modern Hollywood, that is remarkably restrained for a major VFX-heavy blockbuster starring someone as famously expensive as Dwayne Johnson. Most Marvel movies start at $200 million.
And that $90 million investment yielded an astonishing $963 million worldwide.
Almost $1 billion. It became the 5th highest grossing film of 2017 globally. But the real story isn't just the final number, it's how it made that money. It was released on December 20th. It opened directly against Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and the Hugh Jackman musical, The Greatest Showman.
The competition was fierce.
Everyone in the industry, every tracking metric, thought it was going to get completely crushed by the cultural behemoth of Star Wars. The tracking originally predicted a modest $45 million debut. It actually did $36 million over the 3-day weekend and $71.9 million over its 6-day opening holiday stretch.
A solid start, certainly profitable, but not immediately record-breaking. It didn't look like a billion-dollar film on day one.
Exactly. But then the mechanics of word of mouth kicked in. In its second weekend, it had a ridiculously small drop of only 38.4%. In the blockbuster world, dropping less than 50% in weekend 2 is incredibly rare for a wide release.
It's almost unheard of now.
It eventually clawed its way up and passed Star Wars for the #1 spot at the box office in its third weekend, and it just stayed there. It sat atop the box office for multiple weeks in January and February.
It ultimately passed the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man to become Sony's highest-grossing domestic film of all time, a record it held tightly until Spider-Man. No Way Home came along years later.
And if we look at the pure profitability, Deadline Hollywood calculated its net profit at $305.7 million. That factors in marketing, theaters cuts, and back-end deals.
Making it 2017's fourth most profitable release overall. That is an astonishing franchise-cementing return on investment for Sony.
And the critical reception backed up the financial success. It wasn't just a mindless, lowest common denominator cash grab that tricked audiences into buying tickets.
No, people genuinely liked it.
It holds a very respectable 77% on Rotten Tomatoes. It earned an A Cinema score from audiences, which is an exit poll taken right after people leave the theater, indicating extremely high satisfaction. It even pulled an 84% positive score from PostTrack, another audience polling service.
And when a movie makes nearly $1 billion and generates over $300 million in pure profit, the corporate IP machine kicks into high gear.
Oh yeah, the spin-offs.
The movie literally became the thing it was spoofing. They expanded the franchise into actual playable video games. NHN Entertainment released a mobile game, Jumanji. The mobile game, though, it only lasted about 6 months before they completely shut down the servers due to lack of interest.
That's kind of ironic.
Sony Pictures Virtual Reality tried to capitalize on the tech trend and release a VR adventure on HTC Vive, but it was heavily panned by critics for poor graphics and terrible hardware performance and was quickly delisted from Steam.
They just kept trying.
They eventually released a full console video game by Funsolve in 2019. The irony of a movie making fun of clunky video games spawning mediocre, clunky video game tie-ins is just too perfect.
It is the corporate snake eating its own tail. But looking back at the theatrical run, if we connect this to the bigger picture of box office analysis, the legs of this film, meaning its statistical ability to keep drawing audiences and making money week after week, rather than making all its money on opening weekend and vanishing, are legendary.
Unprecedented for a comedy sequel.
Why did it have such incredible staying power through the bleak winter months of January and February? It comes down to counter-programming. It offered pure, glossy, escapist fun with genuine heart.
Dave White, a critic at The Wrap, called it a Christmas tentpole release that aims to please and succeeds.
Which is exactly what people needed.
During a winter where audiences might have been weighed down by heavier, more somber cinematic fare. Remember, The Last Jedi was quite a dark, emotionally heavy, and intensely divisive film for audiences that year. Jumanji was the perfect antidote. It was a cultural pressure valve.
Most blockbuster superhero movies are like flash floods, you know. A massive destructive surge of cash on opening weekend fueled by hardcore fans, and then the water completely recedes by Monday morning. Jumanji was an artesian well.
A steady stream.
It just kept producing a steady, relentless flow of money for months because it tapped into an underground aquifer of families looking for an escape. People were going to work after the holidays and telling their friends and coworkers, no, seriously, I know the trailer looks like a bad idea, but the movie is actually incredibly funny. You have to take your kids.
Word of mouth is powerful.
Which leads me to ask you a chicken or the egg question regarding the economics of nostalgia. Did this film succeed at this massive scale because of its established IP, or despite it?
That is the million-dollar, or rather the nearly billion-dollar question that every studio executive has tried to answer since 2017. I would argue that it succeeded initially because of the IP.
The name got them in the door.
The brand name Jumanji, guaranteed cultural penetration. It gained people's attention, even if that attention was highly negative, skeptical, or defensive. The brand recognition is what secured the $90 million budget from the studio board and attracted the massive star power of Johnson, Hart, and Black.
Right, you don't get that cast for an original script called Jungle Trap.
Exactly. But it had its unprecedented historic staying power despite the IP baggage. The network effect of word of mouth saved it. People walked into the theater expecting a cynical, nostalgic cash grab, and they walked out having experienced a genuinely well-crafted, surprisingly heartfelt comedy.
So the IP opens the door, but the movie keeps them in the room.
The IP opened the door, but the execution of the script and the undeniable chemistry of the cast is why they stayed in the room and told their friends to come back with them.
The execution, and specifically the heart. Which brings us to the final emotional core of the film. Because for all the broad jokes about Jack Black teaching Karen Gillan how to toss her hair and flirt with guards, or Kevin Hart complaining endlessly about his lack of vertical inches, the movie lands a surprisingly profound emotional punch in its third act.
It really does, and it caught a lot of the reviewers entirely off guard.
Yeah, Jeremy Johns specifically mentioned in his review that he was highly surprised by the moments of Hart, saying it hit close to home and resonated with him much more deeply than he anticipated for an action comedy.
The emotional core really centers around Nick Jonas's character, Alex Freak.
Yes, Seaplane.
His avatar inside the game is Jefferson Seaplane McDonough, an aircraft pilot whose specific fatal weakness happens to be mosquitoes. He is the teenager from the 1996 prologue who has been trapped in the game for 21 real-world years.
But he doesn't know that.
Right. Because of how the temporal mechanics work inside the game, he thinks he's only been there a few months. When the modern-day kids finally realize who he is and have to break the horrifying news to him that it's actually 2017, the look of sheer devastation on Nick Jonas's face is deeply moving.
It's a really heavy moment.
He realizes, in real time, that he has missed his entire youth, his young adult life, and that his parents have spent 2 decades grieving a missing son.
And it's through Alex's character that the film executes its most poignant, subtle homage to the original film. It's a masterclass in restraint. When the group finds Alex, he is living in an elaborate, makeshift jungle treehouse, and carved into one of the thick wooden beams is a name, Alan Parrish.
The Robin Williams tribute.
Exactly. Alex casually explains to the group that Alan Parrish built the treehouse and that he's just been taking shelter in it. That's it. It's a fleeting moment.
It is not overplayed with sweeping, manipulative orchestral music.
The characters don't stop and give heavy, tearful exposition. It is a quiet, highly respectful nod to the original character, confirming that Robin Williams' legacy is built into the very architecture and history of this new world.
It bridges the generational gap between the two films and provides a profound sense of continuity that I think definitively quelled a lot of the remaining internet outrage from fiercely protective fans of the original.
It was incredibly tasteful. They didn't try a CGI cameo, which would have been disastrous, and the climax of the film leans heavily into that emotional grounding. The group has to return the Jaguar's eye jewel to the massive statue shrine to lift the curse, yell the name of the game, and win.
The final boss fight.
During the chaotic final battle with Van Pelt and the stampeding jungle animals, Alex gets bitten by a mosquito, which, as we establish, is his avatar's fatal weakness. He is on his very last life. The final black bar on his arm tattoo disappears and he collapses.
He starts physically dying in the game, which means dying in the real world.
Bethany, played by Jack Black, who started the movie as the most intensely selfish, image-obsessed, self-centered character imaginable, rushes over. She performs CPR and literally, magically transfers one of her own remaining lives into Alex, reviving him and saving him.
It completes her character arc beautifully.
The girl who wouldn't put her phone down to talk to her friends willingly gives up a piece of her own soul for someone else.
It's the ultimate narrative payoff for the empathy exercise we discussed earlier. The vain, image-obsessed teenager learns true, selfless sacrifice through the ego death of the avatar.
It all ties together.
Without that emotional grounding, the film would just be a series of very funny, disconnected sketch comedy routines strung together by CGI action set pieces. The stakes feel real at the end because the internal character growth is real, earned, and visibly demonstrated.
They finish the game, they shout Jumanji into the sky, the curse is lifted, and they get sent back to the real world. But here is the massive, timeline-altering twist at the end. The 4 high schoolers return to the present day, 2017, back in the school basement exactly when they left.
But Alex doesn't.
No. He returns to the exact moment he left in 1996. The kids walk down the street to the Reek house, which earlier in the film was depicted as this rundown, gloomy, depressing place belonging to a grieving, broken father.
Played by Tim Matheson.
Right. Now, as they walk up in the new timeline, the house is beautifully restored, well-lit, and decorated for Christmas. They see an adult Alex, played by an uncredited Colin Hanks, pulling up in a car.
He has lived a full, continuous life from 1996 to 2017.
He's gotten married, had kids, and he even named his eldest daughter Bethany to honor the girl who saved his life in a jungle dimension 21 years ago.
It's a tearjerker moment.
And then the final scene. The four teenagers, who are now deeply bonded by their shared trauma, hear the ominous drum beats coming from the game again. They take a heavy bowling ball and physically smash the retro console to pieces in the snowy alley behind the school so it can never adapt and endanger anyone else.
Very definitive, emotionally satisfying conclusion to their character arcs.
So, what does this all mean? The ending is undeniably heartwarming. But as you think about it, I have a big pushback regarding the logical mechanics of this universe.
Oh, the time travel problem.
Yeah, the introduction of time travel at the end, Alex going back to 1996 and living a parallel life for 21 years while the kids grow up normally. Does that fundamentally change or even ruin the stakes of the Jumanji universe?
Messy.
If the game can rewrite history and create alternate timelines where people get to go back and live their lives over, doesn't that make the danger a little less dangerous? There are no permanent consequences?
It introduces a massive temporal paradox, certainly.
Yeah.
Time travel always unravels when you apply strict scientific logic to it. If adult Alex lived his life continuously from 1996 to 2017 in the real-world town of Brantford, New Hampshire, wouldn't he have sought out the younger versions of the kids who saved his life long before they ever found the game in detention?
Right. You'd think he would.
And if the game sends you back to the exact moment you started playing, is Jumanji essentially a pocket dimension that exists completely outside of linear time? You're right to ask if it lowers the stakes.
It kind of acts as a reset button.
But I think within the context of what studios call a four-quadrant family adventure movie, meaning a film designed to appeal to all demographics, young, old, male, and female, the emotional resolution takes absolute precedence over temporal logic.
People want to feel good at the end.
The audience desperately wants Alex to get his life back. They want a happy ending for the grieving father we saw earlier in the film. The filmmakers actively prioritize the emotional catharsis of seeing a broken family reunited over the strict, logical integrity of the game's magic system.
That makes sense.
It's a fair trade-off for the genre, even if it creates a massive headache for sci-fi purists trying to draw a timeline on a whiteboard.
Emotional truth over logical truth. I can definitely accept that, especially for a movie where Kevin Hart explodes after eating pound cake. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the jungle.
It's been a ride.
Let's summarize the ultimate takeaways for you, our listener. We started this deep dive with the question of how a seemingly unnecessary, highly scrutinized, heavily burdened sequel conquered the global box office.
And the answer is that it is a literal masterclass in adaptation.
The movie shifted its physical medium, evolving from an outdated wooden board game into a 90s video game console to stay relevant to a new generation of prey. It brilliantly leveraged the self-aware, massive star power of Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Jack Black, and Karen Gillan to completely subvert tired high school cliches through the psychology of ego death.
It survived a totally lackluster functional villain by relying heavily on incredible rapid-fire ensemble chemistry.
And crucially, it respected its source material and the delicate legacy of Robin Williams, just enough to earn the goodwill of a deeply skeptical, highly defensive audience, resulting in a historic box office triumph that spawned its own massive sequels.
In a modern world of constant information overload, where audiences are relentlessly bombarded with reboots, lazy remakes, and endless, exhausting cinematic universes, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle proves a vital point.
What's the main takeaway for you?
Adapting to the times isn't just about changing the window dressing or updating the CGI. It's about fundamentally understanding what audiences connect with on a psychological level now.
Right, you have to find the new emotional hook.
And having a sense of humor about yourself, actively acknowledging the sheer absurdity of your own premise, is perhaps the ultimate survival tactic in modern entertainment. If you can confidently make the audience laugh with you, they won't laugh at you.
Survival of the funniest. I love that. But before we let you go, I want to leave you with a lingering concept to mull over on your own. A final provocative thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
If the predatory spirit of Jumanji successfully saved itself from cultural irrelevance and starvation by evolving from a 1990s board game into a 1990s video game console, what happens when video games themselves become entirely retro? Oh, that's a chilling thought.
Think about it. As we move rapidly into an era of spatial computing, ubiquitous virtual reality, and neural links, a standard video game console connected to a flat TV might soon seem as antiquated and boring as a wooden board game did to Alex in 1996. It's inevitable. Will the next generation's Jumanji need to evolve into a rogue AI simulation? Or maybe a predatory social media algorithm that literally traps your consciousness in a digital infinite scroll echo chamber where you can never log off?
If the game always mutates to catch its prey, what terrifying shape will the trap take next?
That is a terrifying, but given the established evolutionary rules of the universe, an entirely plausible and inevitable evolution. Something to think about the next time you boot up a vintage game or scroll endlessly on your phone late at night.
Be careful what you play.
Exactly. Because sometimes when you're trying to diffuse that nostalgia bomb, the wire you cut doesn't actually stop the countdown. It just rewires the whole circuit to blow up in a completely new, highly unexpected way.